Good evening and welcome. Mutual trust, mutual respect, mutual sensitivity. That's the tripod on which Prime Minister Modi said Delhi's equation with Beijing will be based. He said it clearly to Chinese President Xi Jinping. Can the Chinese government and the PLA be trusted? Will there be a genuine de-escalation, disengagement and de-induction along the line of actual control? Are we seeing what some experts are calling a pivotal moment in world history, where the two largest, most important countries in Asia, India and China, begin a new chapter in their relations? Or could this just be another false dawn of the kind that there have been many, because China has oftentimes flattered only to deceive? It's a very important day. The first bilateral meeting between the leaders of India and China, much opposed to what people in the Western world were imagining, that India and China will constantly be at daggers drawn. Both countries showing the maneuverability to be able to dial back their tensions. What happens next? That's my top focus on the news track tonight.
पाँच साल बाद smiles and handshake. Border peace and bonhomie. Modi-Xi meet in Russia. What next? Can India trust China? Big focus on Newstrack.
A new chapter, a full stop, a comma, a significant moment, or really nothing to be getting excited and carried away about. We look at all of that. It was the day of the big India-China bilateral. Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met in Kazan in Russia on the sidelines of the BRIC summit. The two leaders greeted each other warmly. There were smiles and handshakes. This one-on-one meeting came days after both countries announced a major breakthrough in Ladakh. The bilateral is the first in 5 years and lasted about 50 minutes. PM Modi emphasized that India and China relations are important for the people of both countries and for regional and global peace and stability, and that mutual trust, mutual respect and mutual sensitivity will guide bilateral relations. The Chinese president batted for more communication to handle differences and disagreements.
Excellency, आपसे मिलकर खुशी है, और जैसा आपने कहा 5 साल के बाद हमारी फॉर्मल मीटिंग हो रही है। हमारा मानना है कि भारत और चीन के संबंधों का महत्व केवल हमारे लोगों के लिए ही नहीं, लेकिन वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और प्रगति के लिए भी हमारे संबंध बहुत अहम है। एक्सेलेंसी, सीमा पार पिछले 4 वर्षों में उत्पन्न हुए मुद्दों पर बनी सहमति का हम स्वागत करते हैं। सीमा पर शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखना हमारी प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए। आज इन सभी विषयों पर बात करने का अवसर मिला है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम खुले मन से बातचीत करेंगे और हमारी चर्चा कंस्ट्रक्टिव होगी। धन्यवाद।
Mr. Prime Minister, it's my great pleasure to meet you in Kazan. It's the first time for us to have a formal meeting in 5 years' time. Both the people in our two countries and the international community are paying great attention to our meeting.
分歧，相互成就，
China and India are both ancient civilizations, major developing countries, and important members of the global south. We are both at a crucial phase in our respective modernization endeavors. It best serves the fundamental interests of our two countries and two peoples, for both sides to keep to the trend of history and the right direction of our bilateral relations. It's important for both sides to have more communication and cooperation, properly handle our differences and disagreements, and to facilitate each other's pursuit of development aspirations. It's also important for both sides to shoulder our international responsibility, set an example for boosting the strength and unity of the developing countries, and to contribute to promoting multipolarization and democracy in international relations.
我愿同总理先生就两国关系和共同关心的问题交换意见。
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm prepared to exchange views with Your Excellency on our bilateral relationship and issues of mutual interest.
Make no mistake, this is the single most significant bilateral meeting that's taken place anywhere in the world amongst any two world leaders all through this year. The leaders of India and China face to face in a room in Kazan in Russia. The significance of this happening with Russia playing the role of an intermediary, helping break the ice that had formed between these two countries. Gaurav Sawant is in Kazan. He's been tracking this meeting for us. Gaurav, I want to put to you the same question that you put to Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri, because he didn't answer it fully on record. But what have you picked up by speaking to all your sources in the government, in the Prime Minister's office, in the Ministry of Defence, about what will actually happen on the border? A certain amount of thinning is in any case expected because we're heading into the winter season. But once the forces pull back on account of the winters, do we have enough of an assurance from the Chinese that the PLA won't come back next summer, April, May? Is that going to be a genuine restoration of status quo ante pre-Galwan 2020? How is the Indian delegation viewing the bilateral between PM Modi and Xi Jinping and the level of trust on the back of it?
Rahul, the fact, as you very rightly pointed out, that a bilateral happened is significant. It's happened after 5 years. But will this lead to any rebuilding of trust? India now has been deceived by China so many times and over decades that India no longer goes by what China says. India will wait and watch what China does on ground. And if it leads to thinning of troops on the Chinese side, India would also wait and watch how much of the thinning is taking place and to what level, because Chinese have better infrastructure along the LAC and they can remobilize very quickly and they can reoccupy that area very quickly. And for India, we are still playing catch up when it comes to LAC infrastructure. That is why when Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks of mutual trust, mutual respect and mutual sensitivities, it is to keep in mind that India cannot trust China for now. So that is why we will have to wait and watch what mechanism is adhered to on ground for Indian soldiers to be able to go up to patrol point 10, 11, 11 Alpha, 12, 12 Alpha and 13 in Depsang and up to our claim line in Demchok. At the same time, what is the mechanism that the Chinese troops adopt to come to their claim line short of Burtse, short of DBO. So those are baby steps that are still being taken. Once those baby steps, give us more confidence, if there is a hotline between the commanders on ground, when the dialogue between the special representatives, which is Ajit Doval on the Indian side and Wang Yi on the Chinese side, once that dialogue resumes, once the foreign secretaries, the foreign ministers of the two countries, Wang Yi and Dr. Jaishankar, are able to build those bridges once again, only then will you think about thinning of troops. So clearly that's not happening for the 5th winter in a row. The next summer will be very crucial. So Chinese actions are more important than Chinese claims and words of this being India and China's century or 21st century being Asia's centuries. We've seen those sweet words very often.
Gaurav, let's spend some time on the body language, as we speak to officials in government, they often say that body language becomes crucial. So I want to spend some time first on the body language of the meeting. I see, you could almost feel the tension in the air, the frostiness on the faces. Ajit Doval looking, in this fashion, very wary of what was being said, trying to hold on to every word. Now, part of that is down to the difference in language and the fact that there is a difficulty in comprehension. But that apart, when I see those images of that meeting taking place with the Indian delegation aligned on the left side, the Chinese on the right, the Chinese are past masters at being very stoic. So even in this image after the meeting where there's a handshake taking place, Prime Minister Modi is beaming. Xi Jinping has a very poker, deadpan kind of face. You can't really figure out what he's thinking because that's just the way the Chinese are trained. Their body language doesn't give very much away. But did you feel that as well, the frostiness in the air that seems to have hung over the bilateral room where this meeting took place in Kazan?
Yes, that frostiness in that relationship remains, because when you rewind images and you see the body language of the two leaders either at Wuhan or at Mamallapuram, or when Prime Minister Narendra Modi hosted the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Ahmedabad, and I've covered both Ahmedabad in 2014 and Mamallapuram subsequently, the body language was very, very different. It's because of the Chinese deceit year after year, incident after incident, and a pattern that's now developed over decades. Each time the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President meet, there is an incident that takes place simultaneously at the line of actual control. It's almost as if the Chinese are speaking in a forked tongue. Sweetness on the face when the heads of state and government meet, and the sourness that comes at the LAC. And that is why now, before any meeting, India has additional number of troops deployed at the line of actual control so that the Chinese can no longer surprise you. In fact, there are instances that the Chinese would lead you to believe, of course completely off the record, that the Indians surprised them on more occasions than one, including while dominating the Moldo garrison in the QPQ operation. So that's the language China understands, the language of strength, Rahul.
Okay, I'll leave it there. China very clearly dealing with a very different kind of India from the India of the past Prime Minister Modi and the Indian army. Very clear that you punch us, we punch you right back. You want to take us on, do it. We'll take a blow, but we'll ensure that you get hit as well. So there's a very, very different, aggressive posture from the Indian side. I want to welcome now our guests on this broadcast. We've got Brahma Chalani, one of India's more senior national security experts. We've got Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, joining us. I have on this broadcast Sanju Verma, National Spokesperson of the BJP. We've got Salman Soz from the Congress Party, and Andrew Luing is a leading China analyst and strategist. Brahma Chalani, I want to come to you first. Some of the experts on China, global experts on China I spoke to, said this is a historic, momentous day for the world. The fact that India and China's leaders are meeting. China has deceived us so often that we can't quite be sure, and their body language gives so little away that, you can't even read about whether they think a meeting went well because they're not, frankly, expressive. They're just very deadpan and poker. From what you've heard and seen so far, how do you think these meetings went? What do you think happens next? Can the Chinese be trusted? Brahma Chalani.
India and China make up more than 1/3 of the global population. And after more than 4 years of warlike tensions along the Himalayan frontier, the fact that Modi and Xi Jinping have met certainly sends a clear message to the world, because any thaw in relations between these two giants will have global implications. Having said that, we have to be very cautious, because you heard from the opening statements of Modi and Xi Jinping that Xi Jinping didn't even mention any new understanding with India. In fact, the official Chinese comment on the new understanding with India came a day after the hyped announcement by the Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Minister of India. And the Chinese comments came without any mention of a new patrolling arrangement. What we are hearing now is that the roadmap for disengagement is still being discussed between the two sides, that even the patrolling arrangement is still under discussion. So we have to be very cautious. What we are seeing is a good move, a positive move toward reducing border tensions, but a lot of work needs to be done. And more importantly, we should not confound symbolism with substance. This has been India's main weakness over the years. We get too much into summit diplomacy, and we mistake symbolism for substance.
Let me put that question to Sanju Verma. You make a very important point. And as it would happen, Brahmacharani, you know my father well, so you know how suspicious he was of Chinese actions. The fact is that this government and this Prime Minister, Sanju Verma, in the past have been betrayed by China. Swinging on the swings in Sabarmati, in Ahmedabad, walking around the temples in Mahamalipuram or Xi'an. You know, we've been through that drill, and each time India comes away thinking that there's been movement, that there's been a positive development, and that there's a new normal and that things are getting better. Each time China betrays us in the back, and that then hurts us for a long time to come. You heard what Brahmacharani said. Their statement came a day later. Their statement is not as effusive as ours is. There's no talk of new border protocols. Even what the Chinese president said, which was made public, was very vague and generic. Therefore, to what extent is your government and your party willing to trust the Chinese at this moment?
You know, Rahul, with no offense to Brahmacharani or any of the strategic experts on your panel, you know, there is a saying, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know, the very lot which has been waiting for the last 4 years, saying that, you know, a dialogue, you know, more importantly, a bilateral meeting between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi is long overdue. Today, you know, they are now finding some chinks in the armor to once again say that, oh, this is just symbolism, but nothing substantive. I will just run you through very quickly in 20 seconds the key highlights post the, you know, Galwan skirmish or clash in 2020. In February 2021, for the first time, troops both from the Indian side and the Chinese side pulled back from the northern and southern banks of Pangong Lake. And I think this was significant in terms of the de-escalation process, which started way back in February 2021, because there was a voluntary disengagement even in February 2021 by both China and India. And China, which shares a border with more than 18 nations and has a dispute with more than 21 nations, has never in recent history engaged in a voluntary disengagement, which was done in February 2021 because you have somebody called Narendra Modi as the Prime Minister. Then in August 2021, you had the Indian and Chinese forces which disengaged from the patrolling point 17A, creating buffer zones to maintain peace. And then in September 2022, disengagement at patrolling point 1515 marked further progress in easing of tensions and further progress in the de-escalation process between India and China. Yes, without shoving the hard truths under the carpet, I will agree that Depsang and Demchok, you know, these are areas, regions where there are challenges which we will navigate and come to a resolution bilaterally sooner rather than later. But for anybody, particularly the Congress, I see, you know, tweets from the likes of Jairam Ramesh and Manish Tiwari, quick to give lessons to Narendra Modi in diplomacy. Let me remind in 20 seconds, Narendra Modi does not need lessons in diplomacy, especially when it comes to China, from the Congress, right from signing a lopsided Panchsheel agreement way back in 1954 by Jawaharlal Nehru, to giving away 38,000 square kilometers of Aksai Chin, saying not a blade of grass grows there, to giving away, you know, Indira Gandhi gave away Kachativu Islands in 1974. We have the Congress whose foreign policy has been in tatters. So we don't need lessons from them. I think today India and China are talking as equals. Prime Minister Modi emphasized on the words mutual respect, mutual trust, and mutual sensitivity, saying that both nations need to come together.
Okay, can I just pause you to say that you're saying we're talking as equals? We may like to believe that. The Chinese side may not necessarily hold that view, and that's just the arrogance of China's rise. Salman shows, you know, the opposition and in particular the Congress seems to be deriding some of the forward movement. I mean, shouldn't you be cautiously optimistic? Some of the tweets and posts and statements that I heard, DDLJ and what have you, it almost seems as if you would not like, because this tension with China has been a key part of Rahul Gandhi's attack strategy. It almost feels as if you don't want that there be peace or some kind of rapprochement between Delhi and Beijing.
Rahul, we are looking for an honorable settlement to this, to our minds. one of the worst foreign policy setbacks in decades, I think, that we've suffered. So we're looking for an honorable settlement here. We're not looking for anything else. We want to come out of this honorably, with India's honor held high. If that is too much for some people to bear, that is their problem. The fact of the matter is that the Prime Minister has actually been pretty naive in this whole sorry saga. I mean, who after all? I mean, let's just ask a simple question: why are we discussing this at all? Because the Prime Minister, in June 2020, 4 days after Galwan, the unfortunate time when 20 of our soldiers laid down their lives for our country, what did the Prime Minister say? He said, "Na koi hamari seema mein ghusa aaya hai, na koi ghusa hua hai." That is what the Prime Minister said. If nothing like that has happened, why are we having a discussion? No, okay, wait.
Okay, Sanju Verma, you spoke at length. Extend the courtesy of allowing Salman Soos to complete. Salman, I give you 20 more seconds to wrap up.
No, give me a little bit of time. You give Sanju Verma a lot of time. Now, I only want to ask a few questions. And that is what we need to get our answers to. And I think as the opposition, that is our role. And I hope media does. And I know there are other guests on this show, and they should also reflect on these questions. The first question that I have is, will the Indian troops now be able to patrol Truck Lane Line in Depsang? What about Demchok? There are 3 patrolling points. Will our troops be able to go back there? What about Pangong So? We used to patrol up to Finger 8, but we are restricted to Finger 3. Is that going to change? There are other places, like Gogra Hot Springs area, where we had patrolling rights. The question for the government is disengagement. The foreign secretary talked about disengagement, the process leading to disengagement, and eventually a resolution of the issues. I think the Prime Minister is the one who's actually created a huge problem for the country. And now we're all trying to somehow get out of it, and I hope we do. But we need an honorable settlement.
Okay, so Sushant Sarin, if we spend a moment drawing you to decode the body language of the principals as they exit after this bilateral, it's quite clear, and I'll ask my producers to put those images on the screen. The Prime Minister looks quite pleased with the way the meeting went. His smile is quite effusive. What do you make of Xi Jinping's body language? It's just like you can see his face. You can't really read what he's thinking, or his body language doesn't reveal very much. How do you think, from what you know sitting where you are and from all your experience, you think this meeting went? And what do you think happens next?
So Rahul, I'm not an expert on body language, but yeah, I think the Prime Minister seemed very pleased, and the Chinese president, fit that phrase, the inscrutable Chinese. So it's very difficult to, figure out what exactly they were saying. But let's look at what the substance of what has transpired. One, I think it's very clear that at a diplomatic level, both sides are going to re-engage each other. At the foreign minister's level, at various levels, that's the announcement. The special representatives will be meeting and will be talking about border settlements. And frankly speaking, I don't think anything is going to come out of it, because there were plenty of rounds of talks in the past, and there's been virtually no breakthrough on that. So I'm not quite sure what new breakthrough is going to come out of those talks. That is one. Secondly, on the military disengagement, I think that's also a work in progress. I think what's been agreed right now is a very, very small step, which is that some of the areas in which patrolling was blocked, and it was not just blocked by the Chinese, it was also blocked by us. I think there'll be some arrangement which will be worked out that both sides can go and patrol up to a certain point, or whichever point they want to go to. That the details of that are not known. So that is something which is going to happen. But look, let's face it, Rahul, after what has happened in 2020, and I disagree with what Salman Soos is saying, the moment an adversary power brings large number of troops to the borders, tensions increase, and what you want is that the troops need to be disengaged and de-inducted. I'm not sure if that's going to happen anymore, simply because I don't see how we can pull back our troops. Whatever deployments we have done, would we want to take a chance in pulling back our troops anymore? For example, in Kargil, once Kargil happened, we decided that we are going to occupy those heights which we used to vacate in the winters. And since what, almost 20 years now, 25 years now, we are not pulling back.
No, so we pulled back from some positions, but you make a larger point that yes, on most important positions we're still holding firm, and that's unfortunate given how high those mountain peaks are and how cold it gets in places like Tiger Hill, Toluling, and several others. I want to put that question to Andrew Luing, because what we're seeing so far on the surface from what's publicly known is that the two armies have agreed to allow joint patrols on particular dates, 15 soldiers each, so there's no possibility of a clash because they're not patrolling on the same day. What we don't know, and that's the point that Sushant Sareen was making, is whether the armies will actually pull back, whether there will be this de-escalation, disengagement, and then if there will be at all a de-induction, where the forces that have come to the areas on both sides of the LAC, whether they actually go back. From what you gather from within China, Mr. Luing, your sense of whether this is just very tactical in terms of allowing border patrolling, or is it more strategic in terms of agreeing for the armies to go back? Because relations can head towards normalization only if there is genuine peace along the line of actual control.
Of course, the line of actual control and the border disputes have been plaguing the relationship between these two countries for a very long time. And then both leaders actually signaled the need for de-escalation months before this BRIC summit. And it is instructive that before this BRIC summit, a protocol breakthrough in reaching agreement on a kind of patrolling protocol was reached between the two countries, and it was announced first of all on the Indian side. So that suggests that there is a genuine wish for this escalation. And let's face it, the border disputes are not dictated by the military on the ground. Important though they are dictated by the leadership in both countries. And I think that there is a genuine wish to put relationship between these countries on a more constructive level. Now, of course, the BRIC summit is not about border disputes. It's much bigger agenda that binds these both India and China and the rest of the developing world together in the rise of the Global South against a world order which has been perceived to be tilted or skewed in favor of a dominant Western bloc at the expense of the developing world. And that's why over the years, many developing countries feel that they are being marginalized by Western American exceptionalism, sacrificing their development interests and opportunities for growth. And hence that you can see these messages coming out of the BRIC summit.
Sure. No, so why Russia and China would like India to be a closer partner is quite clear. Brahma Chalani, the question is how far can and should India go? There are elements in corporate India which want to allow FDI to come in from China, which would allow personnel to come in from China, particularly in manufacturing, allow for Chinese companies to play a more active role than they've been allowed over the last 4.5 years. Would you be willing to trust Xi Jinping and the PLA enough to go down that route? Or do you think all the rules and restrictions that we've created post-Kalwan should stay and we should just trust but verify and keep monitoring without giving in easily?
There are 2 points, Rahul. First, despite the Chinese encroachments in eastern Ladakh that triggered the ongoing military standoff, India did not impose any economic or diplomatic sanctions on China. High-level talks continued with China. The foreign ministers met regularly. The military commanders met. So there was no attempt by India to rupture the relationship with China. But it's very important to remember that we're talking about a meeting at the BRIC summit, the BRIC summit having catalyzed this new understanding between China and India. Similar thing happened some years ago in 2017 after a 73-day troop standoff at Doklam. An agreement was reached on disengagement so that Modi could travel to the BRIC summit in Xiamen in China. How did that disengagement agreement end up? it ended up very badly because on paper, China agreed to disengage. But within weeks, it began building military fortifications in Doklam, and within few months, it had captured the entire Doklam Plateau. Now, the Doklam was not Indian territory, but India is a de facto security guarantor of Bhutan. And we saw how China gobbled up Doklam, and we were helpless in undoing what
That's
China
a
had
very
done.
important point that Brahma Chalani makes. And I want to put that question to Sanju Varma. We've seen this script in Doklam to ensure a meeting between principals. They agreed to pull back. At that time, too, the BJP claimed this was a big diplomatic victory. Months later, slow, steady creeping ingress into Bhutanese territory in such strength and numbers that by then those were facts on the ground. So China has repeatedly betrayed the trust of Prime Minister Modi. The question is, to what extent are you willing to believe them this time?
You know, Rahul, without being offensive to you, let me first make one thing very clear. You know, I need, as the national spokesperson of BJP, my time. I'm not going to bully you and put a gun to your head saying, oh, you gave the Congress so much time, because you always say you want to elevate the level of discourse, not bring it down. So indeed, if elevating the level of discourse is on the agenda, let me just say something. Diplomacy is not something which is decided within the four walls of a TV studio between six panelists. So you can say Narendra Modi did not do this or did not do that. But, you know, right from elevating the India-Singapore relationship to comprehensive strategic economic partnership, to being the first prime minister who visited Poland in 45 years, to being the first prime minister who had a state visit to Egypt in more than 2 decades. You know, we can go on and on, but the moot point is this. Please understand that good economics calls for good politics and good diplomacy. And I'll give you some hard statistics because, you know, the likes of Jairam Ramesh have been tweeting about this feverishly without getting the facts right. In 2004, when Mr. Vajpayee demitted office, the bilateral trade between India and China was barely $1.4 billion. And in 2014, when Prime Minister Modi took over, in the 10 years from 2004 to 2014, India-China bilateral trade burgeoned from 1.4 to $38 billion, which was more than a 2,500% jump. As you and me speak today, the India-China bilateral trade on an average in the last 10 years annually is barely $73 billion, and we've diversified. Today, our trade with ASEAN is more than $122 billion. Today, our trade with the Gulf Cooperation Council is more than $246 billion. Today, our trade with the UAE alone is more than $69 billion. So people who are saying that, you know, oh, India and China have actually got a relationship which is lopsided to China's advantage have completely missed the plot. But my last 30 seconds to Congress is this. Today, you sit here and give bhashan to the BJP. Please, Salman Soz, if you have the guts and the temerity, talk about the 2008 agreement between Sonia Gandhi and Beijing. Talk about the fact that what was Rahul Gandhi's compulsion to meet Chinese officials in 2017 at the height of the Doklam standoff. And why is it that Rahul Gandhi undermines the credibility of our armed forces and says, Cheen ki sena Bharat ke andar ghus kar उन्होंने हमारी सेना की खूब पिटाई की.
You had your say.
Defense Minister
Now, Sushant Sareen, to compare India's evolving equation with Poland and Singapore with that of China is not an apples to apples comparison, because the relationship between India and China is far more complex, far more nuanced than, say, a Poland or a Singapore. The next question is, to what extent do we move forward on this Aman Ki Asha road with China? Would you allow for FDI proposals from China? It's good for FDI to come in to India in general, but would you trust them, is particularly in sensitive technologies, telecom, electronics? Indian companies want it very clearly. Are we willing to trust the Chinese at this moment?
Yeah, Rahul, you know, at one level, you should not trust any country in critical infrastructure. No? But, you know, we also have a scene where the Indian Air Force is taking pride in the fact that it signed a contract with Uber, and Uber drivers will now have personalized profiles of Indian Air Force officers so that in the event of a war, everybody knows where an Indian army officer is placed and where his families are. So the kind of bizarre things we do is obviously before us. The Navy has already done it. But aside of that, I think Sanju needs to get some of her trade data facts right. 2023, I think the trade had crossed over $100 billion with the Chinese. So yes, the trade has been growing, but that's a very mercantilist way of looking at trade relations. But of course, I think we need to develop our own capabilities, and to the extent that there was some talk of decoupling from China, I don't think we've reached very far on that particular issue. In fact, our dependence on China for a range of other products has only grown over the last couple of years. That is one part of it. Secondly, look, China, Pakistan, all these countries are very critical to India's security. And to compare that with Tanzania or Spain or some other European country, Austria or some other place, godforsaken place, it just doesn't add up. You know, the challenges which we have with China, both at the strategic level, at the economic level, are far, far more complex, not just on the land borders, but also in the oceans. And then you have this entire thing that how does the new strategic alignment starts taking place? Because both at the continental level and at in the maritime domain, there are new strategic alignments taking place. How are we going to play our cards on that? I think the government has done a fairly good job.
You know, that's a very important point that you make, because while Salman shows we don't know the extent to which the Chinese army will ultimately pull back, what we know is that India and Prime Minister Modi, through the BRIC summit, has shown diplomatic dexterity and created optionality on the global high table. If relations between India and Canada are sour, if the United States continues to harbor Khalistani extremists without wanting to act against them, India shows it has diplomatic cards, not as if we are pulling our army back to the barracks and emptying out the fortifications we built along the line of actual control, which is still very much there. And we're sending a message to Ottawa, we're sending a message to DC that India has options, and to that extent, are you willing to concede? Well played, Modi.
No, of course not. I mean, what are we talking about here? Rahul, I think the BJP spokesperson was talking about trade. This is, look at what has happened to trade. $70 billion of Chinese exports coming into India in 2018. Now we're at about $100 billion. That's a record. And Indian exports to China are stagnating at about $16 billion. It's insane. This is insane. This is not foreign policy. This is not, national security. I don't know what these people are thinking. So I hope the BJP people are a bit more serious about India's national security and foreign policy. This is not the way to conduct foreign policy, by the way.
So your defense minister, A.K. Antony, it rankles me no end, said that we don't want to build border infrastructure because it will make it easier for the Chinese army to come in. Between then and now, the mindset has changed entirely, Salman Soz. While you question the BJP as you must, look also at your government and your party's track record on the same score.
But Rahul, why are you talking about a minister from the older times? Why don't you talk about the foreign minister of this government who said that they have a bigger economy? Do you want me to pick a fight with a bigger economy? That's what the foreign minister said. You should talk about the foreign minister. We should question the foreign minister who's currently the foreign minister. By the way, Sushant Sareen said that he disagreed with me. Maybe it's a reflexive kind of disagreement because I couldn't understand what the disagreement was about. Because I was quoting the foreign secretary who said that this agreement is, quote unquote, leading to disengagement and eventually a resolution of the issues that had arisen in these areas in 2020. Our limited point is, we only want the situation that existed in March 2020. That is what India wants.
Okay, let me put that question to Andrew Lewin. You know, the Chinese side hasn't so far publicly confirmed that status quo ante will be restored to a pre-Galwan, pre-2020 April situation. From your understanding, Mr. Lewin, how convinced are you that the Chinese will actually dial back the facts on the ground, the situation on the ground, the deployment on the ground to where it was before Galwan and before April 2020?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yes, sir, I am.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I think that both leaders' intentions are very clear right from the very start. Both leaders want to de-escalate. I think all this hyping about tensions between these two countries is not very helpful. I mean, the whole BRIC summit is about cohesiveness, inclusiveness, cooperation. I think those hyping about tensions against the wishes of both leaders is not very helpful at all. And I think that the fact speaks louder than words. The fact is that China has become India's largest trading partner, not for no reason, because India also needs China as much as China needs India in some way to grow India's manufacturing industry. Make in India 2025 needs China's supply and value chain, in which China sits at the top of the world supply and value chain. So I think that these are the realities. And I think that the intention of both leaders are very clear. They don't want to de-escalate. They want to build a constructive relationship. And all this hype in this panel about this agreements, the suspicions, and also hyping the tensions between those countries is not helpful at all. And I think that you should lead your viewers know that that's the intention of the two leaders, is to de-escalate, to construct a more fruitful relationship, and to build.
If China hadn't betrayed India as often in the past as it has,
and also,
I would have been more believing of you. I'm out of time, but I can see that Sanju Verma has a hand up, as does Salman So. So in the interest of time and with respect to the fact that we're in peak festive season, I have lots of ads to run. So Sanju Verma, very quickly, please help us wrap up.
Thank you. Rahul, I just want to say one thing to Sushant Sareen, for whom I have tremendous respect. I did not use the word annual trade. I said the average annual trade in the last 10 years is barely $73 billion. My facts are never wrong. But let's not make this about numbers alone. I'm not comparing the India-China relationship to a Poland or Tanzania or an Austria. Let's not forget that the Quad was set up way back in 2007. It remained inactive for the longest time under the aegis of Sonia Gandhi / Manmohan Singh government. And today, Quad is a very active body. And as Prime Minister Modi says, it is to build peace, progress, stability within the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily to rebut China. And I think the Congress also needs to answer, why is it that the Dhola-Sadia bridge, which is a permanent bridge between northern parts of Assam and eastern part of Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh, was not built for the longest time. You started it in 2011. You then gave up on it. We completed it in 2017.
Salman Soz, 20 seconds, please wrap up.
Was started by you in 2005, and then you gave up.
Okay, Salman Soz.
I just want to address Andrew Leung about his desire for peace between the two countries and how the leaders are trying to achieve that. Mr. Leung, all we want, for China has a huge trade surplus with India, almost $90 billion. So China should be happy. All we want is that we want the status quo ante of March 2020. Is that so hard? If China values this relationship, maybe that's the least they should be doing.
Okay.
We'll go back
Sushant Sareen has his finger up. Sushant, 20 seconds. Please help wrap up.
Very, very quickly. One, the Quad was not taking off from around 2007, not because of Sonia Gandhi or Manmohan Singh, and I'm no fan of theirs, but because the Japs and the Australians were not very keen on it. And secondly, I think, again, I disagree with Salman, not in the way he thinks I will, but I think, we sell ourselves very cheap when we say all we want is to go back to 2020. I think we should now make a play for a bigger kind of understanding with the Chinese, or a settlement with the Chinese, rather than going back to 2020, because if you go back to 2020, you will repeat what happened in 2020.
Okay, here's what I wish to say in conclusion. We, you, me, all of us together as a country and as a people simply cannot afford to trust the Chinese. We've been betrayed as a nation way too often in the past to take the Chinese at face value. If what the Chinese and the Indian governments are saying is correct, and we go back to the situation as it was before 2020, it would be a big diplomatic and military victory. However, we cannot count chicken that haven't been hatched just yet. We have to verify. We cannot trust when facts on the grounds change, and if they change for an elongated period of time, only then, ladies and gentlemen, can we truly believe that China has changed its tune. Till then, we must necessarily have our guards up. For the opposition to say the government hasn't done anything, and for the government to say this is a big victory, is a very natural political line to take. As citizens, as people concerned about India's national security, we cannot give in so easily. The Chinese are very suspicious of India's rise. They would not like India to rise. India has to continue to ensure that we keep a very close eye on everything that's happening along the line of actual control. No concessions till the time we are sure that they're actually agreeing to pull back and pulling back their troops on the ground. That being said, now shifting focus to the American elections, former US President Barack Obama rapped to Eminem's iconic song Lose Yourself at a Kamala Harris campaign rally in Detroit. Listen in.
Now I notice my palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, vomit on my sweater already, mom's spaghetti. I'm nervous, but on the surface I look calm and ready to drop bombs, but I keep on forgetting. Dun, 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 dun. I thought Eminem was going to be performing. I was going to jump out. Love me some Eminem. I love you back. All right. I love you back.